Hello everyone, and welcome back to the show that loves you, no matter if you're a human, a zombie, a vampire, a lichen, or somewhere in between. As long as you rock a leather coat and stick that superhero landing, you're welcome here on Versus. And today, it's a monstrous multiplex matchup that will pit two of the most fervent fan-based franchises of this millennium against each other, because it's Underworld dueling against Resident Evil. In one corner, you have the Kate Beckinsale-led film franchise known as Underworld. It's He's/Her stars Selene, an ass-kicking, lichen-dispensing death dealer with some vampirical tendencies. In the other corner, it's the Milla Jovovich-led video game adaptation series called Resident Evil, which sees her star as Alice, an ass-kicking, zombie-demolishing, one-person army whose doppelgangers are not to be messed with either. But this is Versus, and I will mess with both of these celebrated properties. Both are super successful, but only one will triumph by winning the program the critics call a show, and quote, something to watch, and quote, my son hosts it. Hi Mom, here's how we'll determine a winner. Round 1, box office. Round 2, Tomatometer/audience score. Round 3, villains. Round 4, high score. And then we'll do a wild card round that might be all in slow motion. At normal speed, these movies might be like 38 minutes long, but they're jam-packed with action, attitude, and ass-kickery. Did I mention ass-kickery already? Remember back in the old days when all we had to worry about were lions and tigers and bears, oh my? Well, we're not in Kansas anymore. Now it's lichens and zombies and vampires. Holy crap! Bring your heart, strap on some courage, implant a brain, and oil will be a precious commodity in these worlds. Gladiators ready? Let's get it on. Round 1, box office. Far be it from me, my mom's third favorite television host, to spoil anything about what's to come in today's episode of Versus right off the bat, but here's your fair warning. Our two film franchises will have a much better time in this round than they will when they enter the tomato patch. But hey, before you can be wrecked by the critics, you gotta at least be released in theaters. Resident Evil bowed first, and it was way back in 2002 when Mortal Kombat film legend Paul W. Anderson directed Milla Jovovich in the inaugural Resident Evil, which was also an adaptation of a hugely successful video game. That fan base came out in full force to witness the big screen debut of Alice, and the movie raked in over $100 million worldwide on a budget of just $35 million. And from there, no other Resident Evil film would ever fall below $125 million at the box office. Meanwhile, the first Underworld was released the next year, and it nipped on the heels of Resident Evil. Selene and friends took a $22 million budget and totaled $96 million with it around the world. Underworld Evolution from 2006 and Awakening would eventually surpass the $100 million mark at the movies, with Awakening being the high bar for the Underworld franchise, earning $160 million around Earth. 2009's Rise of the Lycans and 2016's Blood Wars both adjudicated themselves just fine, thank you, as they took in over $80 million on each outing. But there's just something about Alice and that pesky Umbrella Corporation. Resident Evil Apocalypse and Extinction were the next two movies released under that banner, or umbrella, and they both did $125 million and then $150 million respectively. So if they called it quits after 3 flicks, it would be Underworld that would have the highest grosser of any film in either franchise. But they kept making those Resident Evil films, and with good reason. Paul W.S. Anderson, can I just call him Paul Anderson for the show? He's my favorite Paul Anderson that directs movies. Did I just come up with a great Versus episode? Anyway, he returned for the 4th entry in the series, called Afterlife, and it crushed at the Cineplex to the tune of $295 million across the globe. Retribution would follow up, taking in $240 million, and then the final chapter, until another book is written, am I right? Broke barriers no other film we're talking about today can brag about. $314 million in 2016. Wow! A sub 4-minute mile, 600 touchdown passes, or the 6th film in your franchise crossing $300 million? Look, they're all great athletic achievements, but only one involved me getting to indulge in movie theater quality popcorn. No offense to you, microwaves. Resident Evil wins the individual film grand total, and it doesn't lose much momentum when we look at averages. The 6 films have notched a combined $1.22 billion, making for an average ATM withdrawal of $204.5 million per flick. It's an imposing number for even the most celebrated of film properties to match, and Underworld just can't climb to those heights. But those 4 films still did over $500 million of total business, making for a solid $108 million per film. Here's the best news for either studio behind this magic. It only cost you about $43 million to make one of these. So, let's keep it going. For today, in the here and now, it was a nice effort by Selene and her vampire cronies, but Alice and the Red Queen and, all those zombie hordes proved to be too powerful of a force. Resident Evil wins round 1 and goes up 1-0. Round 2, Tomatometer/audience score. And now it's time to see what the critics had to say about these two film franchises with hardcore fan bases. Let's dial up the Tomatometer first, or as I like to refer to it in situations like this, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. It's not going to be pretty, but there is a light at the end of this rotten tunnel, and that would be the audience score. But to get there, we're all going to feel a little like Andy Dufresne crawling through that tunnel to escape prison. Who wants to go first? All right, well, Resident Evil, you have the honor, so here we go. The bookends of this property, 2002's Resident Evil and 2016's The Final Chapter, earned 36 and 37% respectively on the Tomatometer, and that's the best news. The sandwich meat in between would be even more rotten. Extinction, Afterlife, and Retribution all fell into the 20 percentiles, and Apocalypse, the second film released in the series, set the low bar at just 19%. There's no other way to say it. Yikes. The 6 films averaged just 27.6% on the Tomatometer, and let me do some quick math here. Yeah, that's going to be rotten. But don't worry, Resident Evil lovers. You're not matched up against the Godfather trilogy here. All you have to do is beat the team you're playing, and that squad ain't exactly fresh either. Underworld and its 5 movies can't even get up to those lofty high numbers of 36 or 37%. The first Underworld is the standard bearer for this property, and it's only at 31%. And to make matters tougher for the neckbiters and the wolf folk, their lowest rated movie is an even tinier number than Resident Evil Apocalypse. Underworld Evolution devolves into just a 17% on the Tomatometer. In another word, still yikes. The rest of these films all found the 20% range, making for a per-flick average of just 24.8%. Okay, that's enough rottenness for really 3 or 4 episodes of this show. So I'll just remind y'all that Milla Jovovich was great in The Fifth Element, which is fresh at 71%, and Kate Beckinsale was marvelous in Serendipity, which is, of course, at, what's that, 59%? Oh, come on, the gloves match and the book, and, okay, well, look, she was in The Aviator, and that's at 86%. So they're super fresh performers, that's the point. But these movies, let's check out the audience score. Hey, it's better news, even within the context of Underworld and Resident Evil. In fact, every Underworld movie is fresh on this metric, with the lone exception of the most recent effort, Blood Wars, which landed at 49%. Underworld the OG is at 79%, and Evolution is at 72%, making for a franchise average of 65% on the audience score. Hey, that's fresh. Way to go, Team Death Dealer. Over in Raccoon City, Alice and Pals also enjoyed some freshness on the audience score, as the first Resident Evil climbed to 67%, and its immediate sequel, Apocalypse, squeaked into the hot tub at 60% even. Well done. The problem is, to quote Eddie Murphy's James Brown, it was too hot in the hot tub, and none of the following 4 RA films made it back to Freshville. Extinction got the closest, clocking in at 58%, which, if you're keeping score at home, is one below Serendipity. All told, the Resident Evil films are fresh adjacent at 55.3% per flick. So when evaluating both film franchises based on 2 metrics gauging quality, which one do we lean towards? Well, again, we're not talking about all-time critical darling movie sets like The Godfather, Toy Story, or The Expendables. And I'm sorry, I'm just now being informed that I might have overestimated The Expendables, but regardless, Resident Evil and Underworld seem to be by fans for fans, and aiming their stories that way has paid off in the form of loyal enthusiasts that get rabid about their appreciation in chat rooms. And it does help Underworld that it's at least fresh somewhere. The audience score turns the tide, and in a close round 2, it's the fighting Beckinsales that pull out the win, and we're tied at 1 round apiece. Round 3, Villains. I can't say enough good things about the stars of these 2 franchises, Resident Evil's Milla Jovovich and Underworld's Kate Beckinsale, and they can act, kick ass, and they don't seem too fazed by classic movie monsters. And while they both score massive points with me for being the clear leaders of these 2 film series, at some point you gotta wonder why they keep coming back. It's villains! In these worlds, there's always another scarier, more powerful baddie than the previous one to take down, so let's see who had the taller mountain of undead blood and guts to scale. We really get two types of villains across these dueling universe landscapes. You got your classy, well-dressed, highly educated Hannibal Lecter types that use proper grammar and prefer five-star restaurants, and oh yeah, they're also murderous, sadistic psychopaths. Then we have the purebred monsters who only exist to kill. What they lack in intelligence, they make up for in deadly quickness and devastating power, kind of like a xenomorph. And I know, PETA's gonna send an angry letter that the face huggers from Alien are actually very smart and I should respect them. But look, what can I say? I'm more of a Predator guy. Resident Evil spots us great versions of both these villainous archetypes. Jared Harris as Ashford and Ian Glenn as Isaacs. They lend a debonair hand to the foul play that quickly ensues, and both thespians seem to have a blast in doing so. Isaacs is revealed to be the true virtuoso in the realm of evil genius for the movie Apocalypse. Meanwhile, Ashford at least had the noble effort out of the gate of trying to save his daughter's life. That's why he created the T-virus, but yeah, not quite as good in practice as it was on paper. It's tough to trust any corporation that goes by the term Umbrella, and that's especially the case if it's headed by Sean Roberts' character, Wesker. After an attack on Tokyo in Afterlife, he strips Alice of her power, and the two have one of the best fights in the entire franchise. Dr. Isaacs, who creates super zombies and becomes a monster himself after ODing on the good old T-virus in Extinction, continues to be a spiky thorn in the side of Alice throughout the films. But enough about doctors who kept their fingers crossed while taking the Hippocratic Oath. Let's look at some impossibly well-dressed bloodsuckers. Everyone, please welcome back to the show, Mr. Bill Nighy. I feel it in my fingers, I feel it in my toes. Yes, he was also a raucous rocker in Love Actually, but here he plays Victor, the silver medalist of all vampires, and a pretty conniving strategist in Underworld. He has all sorts of foul play plans that meddle in Selene's death dealing, not the least of which is framing Lycans while he does his dirty work too. But let's be clear, Lycans are werewolves and not all that nice to simple humans like you and me. But they can class up a dinner party. Enter Michael Sheen. Before he was David Frost grilling Richard Nixon, he was Lucian in Underworld, the leader of the Lycans. Just look at that devil-may-care smile anytime some carnage is about to ensue. But what I love about Underworld evildoers is that they can transition from classy to full-on universal classic movie monsters so seamlessly, including the doctors. Check out Stephen Ray as Dr. Jacob Lane, who's also a menacing werewolf. Team Jacob indeed. He's featured in Awakening alongside his son Quint, who is a super Lycan. Originally, he wanted to go by the name Uberwolf, but sadly, he doesn't own a Toyota Prius, a driver's license, or a candy dish. But I'd still give him 5 stars just for being the scariest of all the Lycans. Pivoting back to the world of vampires, let's check in on how Marcus's Awakening is going. Yeah, he's back and sexier than ever. Tony Curran plays this role in the first sequel in Underworld lore, provides one of the most menacing fanged presences in the entire series, and really elevates the stakes. Oh, come on, vampires are hundreds of years old. They love dad jokes. Back on Resident Evil Street, we have a lot to deal with. If nefarious physicians weren't enough, we also have outright monsters and some of our good folks that get turned into, well, outright monsters. Not you, Dr. Isaacs. I was thinking more of Michelle Rodriguez's Rain Ocampo, who turns into a zombie at the worst possible time, when Alice and Maddie Ballgame are battling a liquor. You heard me right. It's a liquor, with a tongue that would make Gene Simmons feel insecure. Am I wrong for feeling sorry for this monster when Alice stabs his licking apparatus? Maybe it's because I bit my tongue mistaking it for a milk dud earlier in the movie. Anyway, Matt and Alice prevail, but I did warn you, Matt gets turned into a nemesis, a mutated super soldier, in the very next film. The thing about these movies is our heroes usually win the day, but man, are those victories short-lived. There is no off-season, especially when instead of celebrating at Disneyland, you have to battle zombies, zombie crows, zombie dragons, zombie dogs. Oh, they're still cute. I kind of want one. And the Axeman. No, not legendary Ozzy Osbourne guitarist Randy Rhoads, an actual axe-wielding psychopathic monster. Dude shows up in both Afterlife and Retribution. My highlight is when Ali Larder's Claire slides under him Ricky Henderson style and pops him right in the sweet spot. It's a battle in Afterlife that in real time probably took 3 seconds, but as I mentioned, wow, do these movies love them some slow motion. But what keeps me coming back to the Underworld films is the personality and emotional weight that their sets of baddies have. Sure, we have tons of underling vampires and werewolves to dispense of, but at the top, you almost want to buy into the cult of being an undead monster. It looks fun, and that blue Instagram filter they use for these movies will take 10 years off your age. Bill Nighy's Victor is deep down a tortured soul who would even sacrifice his own bloodline to keep vampires pure. Michael Sheen's Lucian is a cunning trickster who is an expert at keeping the monster within at bay until it's go time. William, or as I call him, Billy the Wolf, was the first werewolf and has a fascinating storyline in evolution, and the most recent Underworld flick, Blood Wars, gave us a memorable trio of opposition. Samira, a next-level vampire, Marius, leader of the Lycans, and Varga, a death dealer whose stats definitely get him into the All-Star game. Resident Evil also features surprisingly deep emotional resonance as well, but the zombie hordes and their many animalistic variations never feel quite as fresh as a new crop of coffin nappers, hairy full mooners, and death slingers. In a close call, I'm giving the edge to Underworld here, and Team Beckinsale goes up 2-1. Round 4, high score. And here we are, the round of rounds in this action-packed, nightmare-inducing, popcorn face-stuffing contest, because when zombies, werewolves, vampires, and more leather than a Montana fashion show get together, you're gonna have some memorable moments. One's a video game franchise, so the high score here will go to which property gave us the most thrilling sequences, stupefying stunts, and yes, slow motion in the rain. Seattle, you're gonna love these movies. Release the Kraken! Or in the case of Resident Evil, the final chapter, a huge winged demon. This is an epic fight sequence from start to finish and had notably better visual effects than when the OG RA was released in the early 2000s, but the final chapter couldn't let us close the book without bringing some fun from that inaugural outing back for one more slice. Yep, it's that laser hallway thing. A thrilling scene back in 2002 that diced up a bunch of Alice's comrades, a similar contraption was used in the final chapter. Some of the best moments in the entire franchise are those close quarters combat entanglements that elicit equal parts suspense and claustrophobia. If you prefer your corridors more well lit and less lasery, Resident Evil has you covered in Retribution. A highlight of Alice's penultimate flick is that battle where she's slinging chains at nasties in what appears to be an Apple store, except with less geniuses and more monsters. But as both RA's Alice and Selene from Underworld can attest, if you slaughter a bad guy but don't do a cool landing immediately after, did it really happen at all? Kate Beckinsale wastes no time in Underworld Part 1 when she deals some death and lands perfectly, despite what looks like a fairly restrictive costume. Who has the better badass landing? That's a question not even the host of Versus can answer. My take is they should team up and do synchronized swimming at the next Summer Olympics. A year before the same trick was attempted in Van Helsing, hey, that's Kate Beckinsale again! Selene was a pioneer of the old shooting the floor with so many bullets it will allow a fall below to a different floor to escape danger gag. It was such a fun, inventive moment that eventually Mythbusters gave it a shot. And apparently it works better in vampire flicks. As far as fight sequences go, my preferred Underworld cinema would be a tie between Evolution and Awakening. In Evolution, we see William, Werewolf Patient Zero, and Marcus, Bloodsucker Extraordinaire, both tango with Selene. And one of the many highlights is when she drives a truck through Marcus, and although it only fells him for a few moments, that's still much better than you or I would do. In Evolution, Selene goes full rampage on the vamps and the wolves, including a scene where she battles multiple hairy beasts in an air shaft. John McClane could barely ignite a lighter in the vents from Die Hard. If the floor shooting magic trick is an all-timer for Underworld, Alice has a counter. In Resident Evil Apocalypse, she knows how to make an entrance. A little fashionably late. Oh, and she rams a motorcycle through a church window. It really spices up those hymns, doesn't it? It's the perfect mix of gritty grappling and over-the-top action. Equally impressive is Milla Jovovich doing most of her own stunts as she runs down a building in the same movie. Years before Daredevil had a hallway fracas or Atomic Blonde iron cast skilleted her way to a win in a kitchen, Alice was showing us all how to make the most of limited space. Okay, we love you both, but now it's time for last licks. Sit down, vampires. I meant the last gasp for each team. In Underworld, I'm going for Blood Wars. Remember how I mentioned how cool and imposing Marius, the leader of the Lycans, was? Well, maybe to us, but for poor Selene, this guy's just practice for her Mortal Kombat finishing move. She rips out his spine. Are you kidding me? Toasty! Okay, that's the cake, but the icing is the Lucian versus Victor fight that we've been waiting for. It finally goes down in Rise of the Lycans and does not disappoint. It's a close battle here, Alice. You got any more tricks up your sleeve? Even though, like me, you prefer sleeveless shirts? Yes, she does. In Afterlife, when once again, the ghost of John McClane is referenced. Underworld had an air shaft. Resident Evil gave us Alice Bruce Willising her way off a building top on a bungee cord to avoid a zombie horde. The only issue? She swings down, then swings sideways, and it looks really cool, and she manages to land right in the middle of You guessed it, another zombie horde. She caps a bunch of them, then Barry Sanders' her way through the rest. If extraterrestrials came down to Earth and wanted to see the most Resident Evil-y moment in all of cinema, that's the scene we'd play for them. And then they'll say, take me to your leader, and we'll show him to the Red Queen. Good luck, E.T. Team Owls wins this round, and wouldn't you know it, we're tied at 2-2. And now it's time for the wild card round, Legacy. What a matchup it's been so far, and now it all comes down to this round, which puts a ton of pressure on my 35-pound dumbbell Arnold pressing shoulders. That's on a good day. I know Kate Beckinsale and Milla Jovovich are watching right now, to which I just say, hi Kate, remember me? The guy from Punk'd? More on that in a minute. For now, we're talking Legacy. Both series have proven to be blockbusters that have spawned a hardcore fan base. But which film franchise has left a bigger mark on cinema, modern filmmaking, and what has the playbook for how to re-kill undead things that have already been slayed the best? Let's hit the bricks. And on this road, by acknowledging how crucial both film slates have been to cementing women as leading ass kickers in Hollywood today, I mean, right now we're treated to movies like Black Widow, we get characters like Michonne, Cersei, Furiosa, and so many more, but back in the early 2000s, that wasn't the case. Trailblazers like Sigourney Weaver's Ellen Ripley and Linda Hamilton's Sarah Connor helped pave a road that Kate Beckinsale and Milla Jovovich would transform into a bustling interstate. The best part is that we never need a convoluted backstory to explain why these two leading ladies had been forced into these roles against their will or better judgment. Taking on fleets of mythological beasts may not be a relaxing hobby, but it's clear early on in both Resident Evil and Underworld that Alice and Selene are right at home when it comes to fantastical action. Resident Evil took the pioneering a step further. Remember zombies? Well, yeah, sure, every other entertainment option these days is some sort of undead, lumbering riff, but back in the day, zombie flicks were not as bankable. Similarly, the idea of melding the lore of vampires and werewolves had been explored scarcely in film, and when it was a central plot point, it was usually found in parodies like Abbott and Costello Meet the Wolfman or the horror comedy Monster Squad. Where Underworld separates itself is the mythology continues to evolve and never gets stale. Lycans and Draculas are underground and remain hidden from the world at the outset of the franchise, but by the time Blood Wars happened, the fifth movie in the franchise, humans had become aware that these creatures weren't just the stuff of fiction, they were walking amongst us, and were in most cases fashion icons. Resident Evil took its storytelling in a different direction, as it went global with the locations before the final chapter brought Alice right back to square one to face off against the Red Queen and the Umbrella Folk within the friendly confines of Raccoon City. Two divergent strategies, but both help set the template for other sci-fi, horror, or action tentpoles to take a cue from. But whereas Underworld built on our affection for classic movie monsters, Resident Evil faced a more modern challenge. How the heck do you make a horror-themed video game into one hit movie, much less a billion-dollar franchise? Mortal Kombat, again directed by the best Paul Anderson, was a modest hit back in 1995, but par for the video game movie course had been duds like Street Fighter and Double Dragon. Props to Angelina Jolie for breaking that video game flick glass ceiling with her Tomb Raider double feature. But Resident Evil had an even higher hurdle to leap over. This wasn't a family-friendly swashbuckling adventure. This was visceral, gory, intense horror that wasn't going to pander to the MPAA or anyone else. The source material mandated that the movies based on it would have to be rated R, and the crew did not shy away from this perceived barrier. Underworld also embraced the R-rated challenge and did so with profitable results. But the reason I lean towards Resident Evil is the groundbreaking work it did in terms of global box office appeal. This was one of the first film properties to lean into its worldwide audience, realizing that just because American audiences alone may not make this a gigantic smash, money talks all over Earth. The final chapter almost grossed as much as Rogue One, a Star Wars story, on its opening weekend in China, which is all the more noteworthy because films featuring supernatural elements rarely show up in that market. Additional points go to Alice for sharing the wealth with other significant female badasses like Ali Larter, Li Bingbing, and Michelle Rodriguez. I consider myself a converted fan of both franchises, having initially scoffed at vampirical action and a video game adaptation. But I've come to realize both film sets have a ton to offer in terms of A+ action, some surprising emotional depth, and considerable legacy. But if it's this close, I gotta go with the film that came first and proved how potent video games can be as movie franchises. Resident Evil edges Underworld in this round, does that cool superhero landing thing, and wins today's match. And now back to that Punk'd story. Your ridiculous host wasn't always the hugely successful Ford Fusion owner that he is today. It's Elise. Back when I was just a young comedian, I booked some jobs on MTV's hit prank show Punk'd, and my first mark was none other than Kate Beckinsale. If we have the footage, you'll see me plus 30 pounds, 2 extra chins, and some stellar curly hair. She mistakenly thought I was the guy who was hitting on her, and when she described the incident to our accomplice, Michael Sheen, he fake rage pushed me into a pool as payback. I wasn't particularly memorable for anything I did, but it was a super fun day, and she was so nice afterwards. So, sorry I couldn't get one of your great characters a win today. Please apologize to Selene for me. 'Twas Resident Evil that gets my W today, but that's just my opinion. Now it's your turn, world. Before the lichens awaken and the apocalypse brings about our extinction, make your voice heard and hit us up on social media with your take. I'm at Mark Ellis Live, and I have not walked on the edge of a pool fully clothed since that day on Punk. Thanks for watching Versus. I'm Mark Ellis reminding everyone, it wasn't the lichens, it was you.